Good afternoon. I'm Bob Redding. I'm Washington representative for the Automotive Service Association. And first, let me welcome the media present today and taking time out of your schedules for this briefing and discussion regarding OE repair procedures pre and post scanning of vehicles involved in accidents. I'd like to first go through some housekeeping items, and then we will introduce the panelists for a few comments each, and hopefully then get into some very substantive questions for the panelists. So again, thank you for being here, and if we could today's panel, go through the housekeeping items first. You've joined this webinar in listening only mode, which means you're on mute. For those who have dialed in by phone, be sure to select telephone and enter your audio pin in the audio panel to eliminate echo. During today's session, feel free to submit any questions in the chat window. Panelists will try to address as many questions as possible at the end of the session. And to submit a question, simply type it in the chat pane. First, I would like to run through just a little overview of some of the policy items for the OE repair procedures. Some of you attended the press briefing that the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and ASA had in Atlanta, Georgia in August. And we discussed 3 bills that were brought forward in various states during 2018 state sessions. An Indiana bill, which ended up being tied up in conference and not moving forward. The debate became OE repair procedures versus an industry standard, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Secondly, in Rhode Island, we saw a bill, 2 bills, a House and Senate bill go all the way and is now a law in Rhode Island. But towards the end of the legislative process, the legislation was changed to include OE recommended repair procedures, but also that this would apply to OEM parts only, which was not the original intent of the legislation. Legislation in Illinois was introduced, but later died. Next slide, please. In the last few years, we've seen repairers use in the industry OEM One Stop that was developed by the OEM Crash Parts Roundtable, working with ASA and other organizations, and we find to be a very helpful resource. But following today's meeting, if you've not looked at this website, the car companies have their position statements on pre and post scanning, as well as OE repair procedures on the website. Next slide, Trish. Today, our panelists are Wayne Weikel, who is Senior Director of Governmental Affairs at the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. Wayne was also with us in Atlanta during the press briefing. We have Jake Rodenroth with asTech, Director of Industry Relations, and we appreciate Jake joining us today. Jake also was with us and discussed this issue in Atlanta during the Telematics and Technology Forum held there. Darrell Amberson is a past ASA Chairman, President of Lametry's collision shops in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area of Minnesota. He is an expert in this area and been in the collision industry for a long time. And Darrell is also chairperson of the Collision Industry Conference Committee on Governmental Relations and Governmental Affairs. And this issue has been on the Collision Industry Conference program for in the last 2 years. So if we could, I will turn it over to Wayne and ask Wayne to make a few comments as to an outlook for the Alliance. Wayne?
Great, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it. I want to start by thanking ASA for pulling this webinar together and for approaching the Alliance earlier this year to find ways that we can work together on this issue. For years, automakers have questioned whether proper repairs were being conducted in the marketplace. Automakers have made efforts to put out repair procedures to help guide repairs, but they really have no leverage to make sure shops are actually following those repairs. The Eagle Collision verdict really held in stark relief the problem that this industry has had for a long time, that there's little check on whether a quality repair is being conducted. If the consumer gets the car back quickly and the paint matches and is shiny, most of them are satisfied. But the general consumer doesn't know what we know. The average consumer doesn't know the difference between a quality repair and a substandard repair. This is the sort of situation that begs for governmental intervention, when the consumer is ill-equipped to really be able to judge independently whether they received a quality repair or not. So this is where we are. Bob referenced the 3 states that considered legislation on this topic this year. We hope to build on the success in Rhode Island and push legislation on this topic in a number of states in the year ahead. ASA approached us with the idea of working together on this issue a few months ago, and we've been laying the groundwork with them to have success in the year ahead. Right now, we are in the final stages of picking states in which we will push this legislation. While we don't have every state sort of identified yet as a start, we expect to be in Texas, in Minnesota, in New Hampshire. We're also picking a few more states to sort of round that group out. What we've discussed many times, however, is that there's so much positive attention around this issue right now by repairers all across this country. It may not matter which states we pick. We may see this in 20 states next year, just the result of an organic grassroots groundswell of local shop owners talking to their local officials about their problems. It's one of the most admired attributes of our society, the ability to petition your government for redress for your concerns. So our intent is to push legislation that will prohibit an insurer from telling a shop to use anything other than OEM repair procedures as approved. One thing we want to be clear on, we view this as separate and discrete from the question of what parts are used in insurance-funded repairs, the whole OEM versus aftermarket part issue. In Rhode Island, insurer interests made the argument to suggest that the drive to follow OEM repair procedures was just an attempt to prohibit the use of aftermarket parts. That is not what this is about. This is about safety of every consumer driving down the road in a repaired vehicle. We intend to make it very clear in our legislation that we draft that these are 2 separate issues, and that a legislature can take action on one without having any impact on the other, and no impact on their existing laws on aftermarket parts. Insurers really are not going to be able to hide behind ancillary issues when this comes up. Either they support repairers being allowed to do the repairs they've been trained to do following OEM repair procedures, or they don't. Either they've learned from the Eagle Collision case, or they haven't. We ask a lot of repair professionals. The investment in the right tools is considerable. Good technicians are always looking for more training and taking classes to improve their skills and their knowledge base. What we need to do now is encourage those good behaviors by making sure shops are properly paid for the proper repairs that they are doing. Once they go through all the training and buy all the tools so that they are in a service-ready position and want to do the correct repair, the last thing we want to see is an insurer coming in with a way to cut corners on that repair. So I will stop at that and turn it back over to you, Bob.
Thanks so much. And Wayne and Jake, who's second generation at least involved in the automotive industry, and I'll turn it over to you. And Jake's got a few slides for us. Jake?
Thank you, Bob. Again, I want to thank ASA for having me here today. If you hit to the next slide, the level of complexity the collision repairs and the mechanical sector are going to continue to face will only continue to emerge, and with really no end in sight. You're looking at the topology of the control modules in the new DT chassis Ram truck. So 2019 Ram truck, every one of those little boxes is a control module or an actuator. And as you can see, it really doesn't matter where the vehicle is impacted. Those modules are everywhere, and they're going to have, scan tool cell level support to those modules, so that we can make sure they're working properly. And this is really the whole topic around the pre and post diagnostic scans. What are the health of those modules after an impact? And as you can see, they're everywhere. If you go to the next slide, this is the 48-volt electric system in the new Audi A8. We're seeing an increasing number of car manufacturers going to smaller displacement gasoline and diesel engines and bringing more electrified powertrains into the market. And we're also seeing a lot of forced induction with supercharging and turbocharging. And with these changes, we see a lot of cooling systems and SCANSOL supported parts that actually make these vehicles function properly. So, the bad thing about electronic components, while they're really convenient and they're really robust, is that you can't visually look at them and determine if they're okay. So really, talking to them with the diagnostic software is critical. As you go to the next slide, these are the advanced driver assist systems on the A8. 35 different driver assist systems on the A8. An astounding number when you start to think about it. The vehicle has the ability to actually raise the body structure in the event that it feels like it's going to be T-boned. So the left side of the suspension will raise slightly to bring the strength of the lower rocker panel and B-pillar so that if it's involved in a crash, it sustains collision forces better. It has a laser on the front that watches for potholes. So there really is no end in sight of the level of technology on the comfort and convenience side, safety, and the fuel economy systems. So as you go to the next slide, this is a simple battery disconnect. When I ask shops, do you look up and research OEM repair procedures on how to disconnect a battery? It's a fundamental skill they usually learn when they're in grade school. So when they're working on a car with their parent, it's one of the first things you learn. So on this Chevrolet Cruze, that procedure is 7 pages long. And as you click the next animation, and one more time, you can see that it tells us to perform volatile memory programming so that we initialize the automatic sunroof and the windows. And then it even says, inform the customer that the start-stop feature will not be available until the vehicle sits for 3 hours. These are the kinds of things that we need to know about before we deliver a vehicle back to a customer. Because as Wayne said, they're well in tune with how their vehicle works, but they're not really sure what makes it do that. So as repairers and professionals, it's something that we need to continue to educate ourselves on. Next slide. So one more. Another thing that's kind of, going into the industry is calibration. You got a lot of folks out there running to go and buy their favorite tool and go and get calibration targets and things like that. At our company, we have 3 bricks and mortar calibration centers where we're doing a lot of learning. And this is what it looked like in January of last year. We started acquiring targets and tools and testing to see what works, neutral colored floor, the lighting we can control as well. If you hit the next slide. And in 4 months' time, you can see the evolution. We had to put in an alignment machine, recess them to the floor, because a lot of these procedures require us to do a 4-wheel alignment prior to calibration. But also, these calibration procedures are written around bodies in white, vehicles that have not been hit, welded on, painted, pulled, all these things that we see in a collision environment. The repair procedure is written around a perfect vehicle. Go to the next slide. So as I close this thing out, it's really important that we start to assess the damage and repair on these vehicles like they're a human body, because everybody's a little different and everybody has a different, different symptom, right? So same thing with the vehicles when we consider the trim levels, whether it's a fully loaded F-150 or it's just a base model work truck F-150. From an electronics perspective, they can be very different vehicles. So it's important that we really tailor the repair plan to that vehicle and to the point of impact using the OEM repair procedures. I think that's what I've got. Thank you, guys. I'll get back to Bob.
Thank you, Jake, so much. Darrell Amberson now will give us a view from a collision shop owner's perspective. Darrell?
Thank you, Bob. We find ourselves in the midst of some very rapid change. We're part of an evolution. Going back, frankly, decades, we were trained on generic repair procedures where, if you think in terms of heating, shrinking, pulling, welding, and things like that, most of these repair procedures apply generically to virtually all vehicles. And as time evolved, construction started to change, more sophisticated materials, more different materials. And so we found ourselves with closer tolerances and different procedures for each vehicle. And now fast forward to today, you add these very sophisticated, elaborate computer systems on there. So we are in the midst of a time where very specific repair procedures required for these cars. Each and every one is different. There are different materials, different material thicknesses, different types of welding procedures. And again, couple that with all the electronic scans, calibrations. So we have found ourselves really in a place where we are very reliant on the factories to tell us how each repair procedure is supposed to be done. And so we have no choice, frankly, but to depend upon them and reference them. The John Eagle case is a classic case of why we are at significant risk if we don't do that. And frankly, there have been other cases that may not have been as high a profile, but all of them are cause a lot of anxiety for those of us who repair vehicles. So we find ourselves in a situation where, again, for virtually every repair, we should be looking up the factory repair procedures. And frankly, there are no other repair procedures. That generic philosophy is frankly ancient history. We should, and we can't even rely on the repair procedures that we looked up in recent history, because oftentimes these evolve. Manufacturers are constantly looking at them and updating them. So again, we have no choice but to look at it that way and focus on exactly the right repair procedures, so we're replicating the car the way it was, as close to as it way it was when it was built, so that it performs and functions exactly as it was designed to do these very sophisticated operations that they perform. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Darrell. And members of the press, please feel free to submit questions. We've got a few that have come in already, and I will kick it off with first question. Darrell, maybe you continue with this, and Wayne, Jake, feel free to comment too. Do vehicle owners have an expectation that OE procedures are followed? And a track to that, also comment on what about scanning too, please, Darrell?
Yes, that is changing. We've had anecdotally specific examples where on an estimate, we've included scan operations, and our estimators are explaining that to customers. And we've actually gotten jobs out of it because maybe the shop that they were comparing us to didn't do that, and the customers were impressed by that. We also measure referral rates. In other words, when a customer comes to us, why did you come to us? And we have seen, our company has had a lot of OE certifications for a long time, and we've seen a very significant uptick in terms of customers that come to us because of OE certifications. And when you think of it, it just kind of makes sense. People are paying more and more attention to crash tests, for example, when they buy a car. The 5-star crash ratings and things like that. It's more and more important to people. Safety is a bigger deal than it has been in the past.
Well, we've got some questions rolling.
Bob,
more questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Bob, this is Jake. I'd like to add to
Yes.
that as well. I think that one of the questions that, when I work with our shops, I ask them to ask every customer, why did you buy that car? Number one, it's a really odd question for a collision repair to ask, but every one of us on this call that owns a vehicle and listening in the press there has a vehicle, and there's a specific benefit or feature why we bought that car. We really love the fuel economy. We love the leather seats. We love the color. And, when one of those things are no longer available after a repair, I really think customers are sensitive to that. So it's something that, when you're asking customers, and when they have the ability to have visibility of the repair through telematics, and they know that you disconnected something, I think it's only going to heighten their sensitivity around a repair. And I think it's just critical for us to ask those probing questions when a vehicle drops off.
Thank you, Jake. Wayne, this next question may be directed best for you to respond. What concerns do you have about grassroots efforts in other states that possibly aren't part of our overall strategy or immediate strategy? And specifically, what can go wrong? And what advice do you have to those working toward that in other states that might not be in the first wave of OE repair policy targeted states?
Sure. I mean, that's a reality we deal with every day on a whole range of issues. Of you might have something in one state that someone had the idea to file, and then you get copycat for someone either heard about it, read a story about it, just organically thought of it on their own, or went to CIC and they heard about something there, and now they want to go back to their legislator who they know from Little League or this, that, or the other. Yeah, it happens all the time. I think that is where when things get filed, they all get sort of dumped into the same bin. They get referred to the same committees. So even if someone is sort of going down this road, maybe doesn't know every answer and doesn't know every exactly how to file something, it goes to a committee of jurisdiction that sort of knows a little bit more about the topic, and then people like myself find out about them, and we come in and try to help the committee along and express our views of what is else out there to consider on the topic. But yeah, I mean, it is the joys of the Wild West of state affairs legislation, that you don't know where things are going to come up and how they got there, or what's driving them. But yeah, I think especially on this issue, I think it's a real possibility that we see this in a number of states in a number of different forms, and we'll engage and try to see it through to the best possible outcome.
Well, our next question is, thank you, Wayne, has an example of this particular situation, and that is, what about if there's no OE procedure published for the repair? And for an example, Ford doesn't have the they say it's in their repair procedures, so there's no reason to release a policy statement on the scanning piece. But collision repairers have a problem getting paid in some instances from insurers, or some insurers, because it's not explicitly listed in the policy position for Ford. But that's just one example.
I can chime in on that one if you want, Bob.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll defend Ford here. They do have very detailed diagnostic literature in Motorcraft, and the document you're looking for is called Diagnostic Methods. And a lot of shops are not really familiar with it because it's very technical in nature. Ford really wants you to focus on the root cause of the issue that you're trying to diagnose. But they do have language around continuous memory DTCs, where they don't want you to leave continuous memory DTCs that are from the repair or from the process of repair in the vehicle when it leaves the repair facility. So, it's kind of a technical way of saying, we want you to perform diagnostic scans or network tests, as they put it. But it doesn't say pre-scan, post-scan this year or anything like that. So it is there, and it's fairly detailed. I think that's why most repairers don't know that it exists, and they're not sure where to find it. But it is called Diagnostic Methods.
Thank you, Jake. This next
Bob,
question.
Please, Bob, this is
Wayne.
If I can expand on that. Since this issue has come up, we've had a lot of conversations with repair professionals within manufacturing facilities, those who develop these repair procedures, and we have tried to nudge along the idea of just coming out with a blanket statement, or just a bold statement at the top that you must do this, including pre and post scan, depending on the vehicle. And what we sort of I've run into over what I've experienced is sort of what Jake said, that such statements are embedded in the repair procedure, so that if someone is following their repair procedures, they should see it within the repair procedure. The challenge, though, and I think what the rub on this is whether the repair shop is actually going to get paid for it, and that is a whole different situation dealing with insurance companies. And I think that is a particular point that we are trying to include within our legislation, to make it clear that pre and post scanning, or if it's listed within the repair procedure, it is part of the repair procedure. It is not considered optional for a repairer to do or not do. If you want to conduct the correct repair, it may include a pre and post scan, and increasingly so on newer vehicles. So that is something we're trying to address. And I do think it's worth noting, it is ridiculous that we are in a position that we have to go and pass a law to get proper repairs to be done in a marketplace and have proper repairs paid for in the marketplace. And I really don't think we need to pass law to change all 50 states. All we need is insurance companies to change practices of what they are doing and how they are handling these repairs. So in the short term, we are going to push this legislation, and we think we're going to have success at doing so. But we're hoping that this is something that corrects itself, that will not require going to every single state to pass just to get the repairs that consumers deserve.
Thank you.
Bob, can I add to that?
Sure, please.
I couldn't agree more with that. Those position statements are wonderfully handy to be able to show and ensure what the position is, and it makes it fast and easy. And I know one of the reasons a lot of the manufacturers have stopped producing as many of them is that they really want you to go to those procedures. And frankly, we really should be doing that. We really don't have a lot of choice. And for the most part, that information is there. The manufacturers keep getting better and better with the information they give us, and seemingly a little bit easier to find, although in a lot of cases it's difficult. And I could foresee a time in the future where, say, an MSO, you may even have to have a person on staff or a small department that just provides this information to staff. That just seems to be the way we're going. It kind of feels like, if you make an analogy to the aircraft industry, where a plane comes in and a repair is identified, the repair procedures are looked up, the repair staff is briefed upon it, they perform the repair, somebody inspects it, somebody signs off on it, and the plane goes back into service. We seem to be going along a line that would take us close to that sort of a model. I think we just need to adjust to it. That's just what we have to do. And then the payment part, I couldn't agree more with the point that Wayne made. Too many times, especially in DRP scenarios, kind of understand it maybe a little bit more. The insurers are very, very demanding upon us on the photographs and the documentation we have to provide. And in non-DRP circumstances, my gosh, sometimes it's just over the top. Frankly, it almost feels like they're just doing it to find ways not to pay you for something, because that burden of proof really shouldn't be on us as repairers. We're doing it a lot, but that is the reality of what we're dealing with today.
Thank you, Darrell. We've got a couple more questions here that are rolled in. Has model legislation been drafted? If so, is it available? If not, when will it be available? Wayne, do you want to
sure.
comment on that?
We have had numerous drafts. It is not fully squared and ready for public distribution. I do expect that, obviously we are coming to the end of the year. The legislative sessions will be beginning soon. We do have something very close. We've got a couple more hoops to just check, to jump through, just to make sure that we've got a uniform agreement on it. But it is something close, and we'll certainly be sure to get it out to members of the press when we do have that. And I do expect it to be soon. I would have liked it to have it in hand for today. I just don't.
Thank you, Wayne. This is really for any of the panelists. Does it cost any more to follow OE procedures than not? And follow-up to that was mentioned earlier in the Indiana legislation. The debate became about a collision industry standard. Is there an industry standard that can be referenced?
I can take that, Bob.
I think I'll try.
Go ahead, Jake.
Oh, well, I was going to say that if you look at the mechanical side of the fence, as far as diagnostics and scanning and things like that, is that when a vehicle comes into a mechanical environment, whether it's warranty or customer pay or whatever it might be, there is diag time that's billed out, so the technician can properly follow the flow charts, run the necessary pin-out checks and wiring checks, and then certainly the output tests and things that are identified in the service manual. So in the collision space, you don't see diag time billed out as much, or blueprinting time, to give those technicians the opportunity to perform similar checks, not only on the electronics, but on the body structure itself. So, welding test samples are an example, right? So it's something that it's not widely seen in collision repair. And I think to Wayne's point, that shift needs to happen due to the complexity of these vehicles, and what it just simply takes longer to follow the procedures and do it right.
Darrell?
I would add to that to answer your question, does it cost more? Yes, certainly it does. It's the additional time. However, in the long run, does it save? I'd like to think so. I would make an analogy of not doing some of these repair procedures as to being like running through a field during a thunderstorm holding up an umbrella. Most cases you might get away with it, not have a problem, but boy, if you have a problem, it's a big deal, and it doesn't make it a smart idea to do it in the future. So in other words, a lot of risk prevention by doing that. I'd like to think in the long run it would save dollars, and we got to keep getting back to the point too. The customer's number one on this, and shouldn't safety be the most important issue on this? And so really we should look at it as an obligation to our customers to do it the right way. An additional point on cost, because of all the additional administrative responsibilities shops have taken on in recent years, most of us, or the industry overall, we find ourselves pretty darn close to a 1-to-1 ratio of support staff versus production staff. And so if you think about it this way, in today's shop, roughly, you're only charging for the tasks that half of your staff are performing. And that's not a good sustainable model. And we're already seeing examples of shops choosing to start charging for some of these admin responsibilities. So in other words, if it takes an hour or two to look up a lot of factory repair procedures, some shops are starting to charge for that, and you understand that logic why. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. We got time maybe for another question or two here. And this is really Jake or Darrell probably best to comment. In your opinion only, what percentage or how of collision shops insist on scanning vehicles, become advocates for consumers or vehicle owners with insurers about pre and post scan?
Well, I would say the ones that are that have decided to take on the pre and post scanning as a part of their business. Remember, they have to all face a day where yesterday they didn't scan hardly any vehicles to today we're going to scan every vehicle moving forward. So it's a really big process shift for a lot of them. So the ones that have taken it on and found out, learned some things they didn't know, they're really champions of it. And they a lot of them have gone to their local news channels about it. They've gone and created consumer-facing videos to educate the customer on the technology on their cars. I've seen all kinds of placards in their shops with the position statements. But I still think there's relatively a small percentage out there, considering the body of work that we're actually repairing out there, that are performing the diagnostic scans identified in the service manual. So we still have a lot of work to do in the collision space, no doubt about it.
Thank you very much.
I agree with
Go ahead, please.
Real quick, Bob, I agree with what Jake said. And many of us see that new department should be a profit center, just like any other aspect of our business. But more importantly, for those of us that start doing it and become champions of it, it's because anecdotally we're finding a lot of stuff that, we've had all this pressure put on us by insurers, and we can often even ask ourselves too, are the manufacturers going overboard on this stuff? Do we really need to do this? But you usually find when you start scanning a lot of cars, you start finding things and you start coming to the conclusion, it's really a good idea to scan every single one.
Are there any closing comments from any of the panelists? Hearing none, I want to thank all of our friends in the media for attending today, and we want to adhere to the timetable we've promised. We know all of you are busy, and we want to thank Darrell and Jake and Wayne for sharing their time with us. And as the state legislatures around the country kick off beginning in January and throughout the year, we will periodically do briefings similar to this to keep you apprised of what's going on around the country on OE repair procedures. Thank you for participating today. If you have any questions or issues for follow-up, please feel free to email or call us, and we'll be glad to help you out. Thanks again.